The officer got a fist in the back of Ellis Kamara's jacket and hauled him over the steel barrier onto the concrete, and the radio went out of his pocket and slid away under the rail into the pen, and the leather card case landed face down and was immediately stood on by somebody who never knew it was there. He was 41 years old, in a black jacket with no logo on it, and he did not fight. Above him, the stage lights swung white through the haze, and 40,000 people were singing, and there was a wall of raised phones like a field of small stars. P.C. Reese Tolley had taken one look at a black man climbing over the front barrier and decided he was drunk and pushing his luck. What he did not know was that on the wall beside every entrance to that stadium, in a frame, because the law requires it, there was an extract from the venue's safety certificate listing the capacity of every section and the name of the officer who holds it, and that, in 18 minutes, the headline act was walking on. Before we find out who the man in the handcuffs really was, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive back into the story. Ellis Kamara worked his first show at that stadium at 19 years old, standing in the front pen with his back to the stage. That is the job. Everybody thinks a steward faces the show. A pen steward faces the crowd for 4 hours and never sees a single song, and after 8 years of it, you have watched something in the region of 2 million people from 3 feet away while they were not looking at you. He has said in a lecture theater to a room of event managers that he did not learn crowd safety from a qualification. He learned it from 2 million faces. The man who trained him was a chief steward called Bernie Fitzhugh, who had been at that stadium since 1994, and who had a rule he said so often it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like arithmetic. A crowd tells you with its body about 10 minutes before it tells you with a scream, Bernie said. Every single time. Nobody has ever been crushed without 10 minutes of warning. The warning is just silent, and it is written in shoulders, and almost nobody in this industry has ever been taught to read it. Ellis was 21, and in the pen at a show in 2005, where 40 people went out over the barrier and 11 went to hospital, and one of them did not come home. And he has never once told that story on a stage or in an interview. And it is the reason he has spent 20 years in a job that nobody outside it has heard of. He became a pen supervisor at 25, a safety manager at 31, and at 38 he was appointed safety officer of that stadium. That title sounds like middle management. It is not. In that country, a venue of that size cannot open its gates without a general safety certificate, and that certificate names one human being who is personally responsible for it, and that person holds a power that nobody else in the building has. Not the promoter, not the artist, not the chief executive, not the police. He can stop the event. On his own word, at any moment, for any reason he can articulate, and everybody else has to comply. There are about 11 people in that region who hold that power. He is one of them. 2 things he kept from all of it, and both matter tonight. The first is the certificate extract. The law requires a copy at every public entrance, a plain frame sheet listing each section of the ground, its maximum capacity, and at the bottom, the name of the safety officer. 14 entrances, 14 frames, his name on all of them, and about 70,000 people a month walk past one and none of them read it, because it is a piece of paper on a wall. The second is a habit that the promoter's venue manager had described in a production meeting 11 weeks earlier as an optics issue. Ellis Kamara does not watch shows from the control room. There is a control room. It has 31 camera feeds, an accounting system, and a very good coffee machine, and he uses it, and he has said publicly that anybody who tells you the control room is useless is selling something. But for about 40 minutes of every show, he goes down and stands in the crowd, in a plain black jacket with no logo on it, with an earpiece and a radio in his pocket instead of on his shoulder, because a camera gives you a picture of a crowd from above, and a crowd is not a picture. It is a body of people with a temperature and a pressure and a direction, and there are things about it you can only know while it is pressing against you. He has explained it exactly once, in 9 words, and every steward in that stadium can quote it. A camera shows you the crowd. It does not show you the push. He had come down at 8:20 during the support act, and he had come down for a reason. At 6 o'clock that evening, the entry counting system on the 2 turnstiles feeding pen 2 had thrown a fault. That happens. What matters is what you do about it. And what had been done about it was that somebody had switched those 2 gates to manual counting, which means a steward with a hand clicker. Ellis had read that on the incident log at 6:30 and had written one line back: revert to electronic before doors, or cap pen 2 at 80%. He walked the concourse the way he has walked it for 22 years, which is not the way a safety officer walks a concourse. Safety officers walk with a radio and a high-vis and a route. Ellis walked in a plain jacket with the punters. An emergency exit gate at the back of Block 19 had a chain loop through it. Not locked, just looped, so it looked tidy, which is the way exit gates get chained everywhere in the world by people who intend to take the chain off later. A fire extinguisher on the concourse was standing behind a merchandise stand instead of in front of it. A capacity notice at entrance C had a promotional poster taped across the bottom third of it, covering the numbers. And a steward on the pen 2 gate had no radio, which meant that if anything happened in front of him, he had a voice and nothing else. None of that was a catastrophe. All of it was the ordinary quiet evidence of a venue running a sold-out show with agency staff. He wrote all 4 in his phone and kept walking. At the mouth of the pen, 2 entrants, a very young steward in an orange high-vis was standing sideways to the flow, watching the crowd instead of the stage, which about 1 person in 6 does. He glanced over and said, "Evening, mate," to a stranger in a black jacket, and he said it like he meant it. "Evening," Ellis said. "Busy?" "Bit busy, yeah." His accreditation said F.A.G.U.E. He was maybe 20. Then, quicker and much quieter, without turning his head. "Mate, if you're going in there, go in on the left and stay by the rail." Ellis looked at him. "Just, if you can," he said, and smiled, and the smile was completely wrong for the sentence, and a group of 6 pushed past between them, and the moment closed. He would think about those 13 words for a long time afterward, not because they were dramatic, but because they were what was left of a young man's courage after somebody had spent 11 days sanding it down. He could not say what he knew, so he said the smallest true thing he could get away with, to a stranger, in case it helped. Ellis went into pen 2, and the show changed inside 4 seconds, and it changed through his body, not his eyes. Now, before I tell you what he felt, I have to explain the one thing this whole story rests on, and it takes 90 seconds, and almost nobody outside that trade has ever been told it. A crowd at a concert is not a lot of individual people. Above a certain density, it stops behaving like people and starts behaving like a fluid, and it obeys the rules of a fluid, and the rules are not negotiable, and they do not care who is in it. The number that matters is people per square meter. At about 4, a crowd is packed and cheerful. At 5, you can no longer choose where you are standing. At 6, you cannot lift your arms, and you are being carried. Above 6, you are inside the thing that kills people at events, and it is not being trampled. Nobody is trampled. It is compressive asphyxia. It is the pressure of bodies on a rib cage that cannot expand. And the reason it kills is that at that density, nobody, including the people dying, can move backwards. A crowd cannot decompress itself. Only the people outside it can decompress it, and only if they see it, and the whole of crowd safety as a profession is those 2 facts in a coat. Ellis went 11 meters into that pen and stopped walking because he could not choose where to put his feet. That is the first thing. Not pain, not panic. Just the small, familiar, awful moment where you go to take a step to the left, and the ground has already decided. Then he did what Bernie taught him at 19, which is to stop looking at the stage and read the body of the thing you are standing in. He counted the sway. A happy crowd sways with the music. Everybody moves together, on the beat, and the wave comes from the front. What was happening in pen 2 was a wave coming from the back, arriving at irregular intervals, 4 or 5 seconds apart. and each one arrived at his shoulder blades and moved him about 1.5 feet without his permission. That is not dancing. That is surge, and it is the crowd trying to redistribute pressure it cannot get rid of. Then he looked at the feet, which is a thing you can only do from inside. 3 people within his arm's reach were on their toes, not jumping, up on their toes and staying there, because at that density your feet get squeezed together and the crowd carries you. Then he looked at the arms. 14 people he could see had their arms up. 2 of them were filming. The other 12 had them up in the position that every steward in the world is trained to look for and dreads. Elbows out, hands at chest height, palms braced against the back of the person in front. That is not celebration. That is a human being making room for their own rib cage. Then he turned round, with difficulty, and looked at the side gangway. Every pen in every stadium has a lateral gangway, an empty corridor across the width of it that must be kept clear at all times, because it is the only way anybody can be taken out sideways when it goes wrong. It is marked, it is stewarded, and it is the single most important piece of empty space in the building. It was full, not a few people leaking into it, full, shoulder to shoulder, all the way across, which meant that Pen 2 had no exit at all. Ellis Kamara stood in the middle of 40,000 people with a wave arriving in his shoulder blades every 4 seconds, and did the arithmetic he has been doing since 2005. Pen 2 is certificated at 2,200. He looked at the barrier line, and the gangway, and the density around his own body, and he estimated it at close to 3,000. Then he looked at the front barrier, at the third stanchion in from the left, and saw that it was not vertical. It was leaning back toward the crowd by a few degrees, which is what a barrier does when it has already been loaded harder than it was designed for, and which nobody standing behind it can see because they are looking at the stage. He checked the time on his phone. 21:12. The support act had 4 songs left. The headline was scheduled for 21:30. And every person in that pen knew it, which is the last piece of the arithmetic and the worst one. At the moment, the house lights drop for a headline act. A crowd surges forward. Every time. It is the most predictable event in live music, and it was going to happen in 18 minutes, to a pen that was 1/3 over capacity, with a bent barrier and no lateral gangway to take anybody out. He got his phone up over his head and filmed the gangway for 11 seconds and the front barrier for 6. He photographed the third stanchion. Then he thumbed the radio in his pocket to call control, and could not raise it, because 40,000 phones in one field will do that to a network, and because his pocket was pinned against the person beside him. So he did the only thing left, which was to get out sideways to the barrier line where a steward could hear him, and the only way out of a pen that has no gangway is over the front, which is how a 41-year-old man in a plain black jacket came to be climbing over the front barrier of the pen he was legally responsible for, in front of a police officer at 21:13 on a Saturday night. P.C. Reese Tolley was 29, and he had been in the job 5 years, and I want to be accurate about him, because the accurate version is worse than the cartoon. He had never in his life said an ugly word about anybody, and would have been genuinely and loudly offended to be accused of it. He was on an event contract, which is overtime, which is how police officers in that country pay for weddings and cars, and he had been briefed at 5 o'clock along with everybody else, and the briefing had been about drugs, ticket touts, and people getting over the front barrier. That last one is the important part, and it is why this is not a story about a monster. People getting over the front barrier at a concert are, 99 times out of 100, exactly what they look like: young, drunk, and heading for the stage. What Tolley had was a sorting system, and at an event it runs on one axis. Is this person a punter, or is this person staff? Staff have high-vis, or a lanyard, or a radio on their shoulder. This man had a black jacket with nothing on it, no lanyard, no vest, and he was coming over the rail out of the crowd. And a black man coming over a front barrier at a sold-out show was not, in Reese Tolley's head, a person with a reason. He was a category with a problem attached. He got him at the top of the barrier and brought him down onto the concrete harder than he needed to. Right, you, over there, hands on the rail. Ellis put his hands on the rail immediately and did not turn round, and started talking to the barrier at a volume that carries in a stadium. "My name's Ellis Kamara. I'm the safety officer for this venue, and I need you to get your sergeant on the radio right now." "Course you are." "3 things," Ellis said, still facing the rail, "and then you can do whatever you want with me." "Save it." 1. Pen 2 is over capacity. It is certificated at 2,200, and there are close to 3,000 people in it. The turnstile counters on those gates went to manual at 6 o'clock. Something went across Reese Tolley's face. It was fast, and it was not confusion, because he did not know what a certificated capacity was and had never in his life heard the phrase lateral gangway. And a man who does not understand a sentence and has already decided the person saying it is drunk hears it as a story being invented at him. 2. The side gangway in that pen is full. There is no way to get anybody out sideways, and the third stanchion on this barrier has started to lean. "Mate, I am not interested." 3. Ellis turned his head, just his head. "The headline act walks on in 17 minutes, and when the lights go down, that crowd will surge forward. So, my third thing is a request. Do not let me go. I do not care. Just put your radio on and say the words Pen 2 over capacity to your sergeant, and then arrest me for whatever you like. And there is the fork in the road, 4 seconds wide." Tolley could have keyed his radio. That is all. He did not have to believe a word of it. He did not have to release the man, or trust him, or understand what a stanchion is. He had to say 5 words on a police channel that a sergeant would then have to do something about. And if it turned out to be nonsense, he would have lost 11 seconds and looked slightly foolish to one supervisor. But Tolley had already decided at the top of the barrier, and every choice after that was just the bill arriving. He had a briefing about barrier jumpers in his head from 4 hours earlier. A man in dark clothes coming out of the crowd, and no backup within 20 meters. And the thing he did next was the thing he had been taught, which was to take control of the person and sort the story out later. That is a technique. It is taught. It works at a football match. It works right up until the person on the barrier is the one human being present who is legally responsible for the thing that is about to happen. So, he did what frightened men do, and here is the part that made it his. "You lot are always the same," he said. He has never denied it. It is on his body camera at 21:14 and 31 seconds, and it is 5 words long, and it is the reason there was a professional standards case as well as a complaint. Ellis has been asked many times what went through his mind and has always given the same answer. "I was counting how long the support act had left." Quick thing before we go on. If you have ever been the person who was right and got treated like the problem for being right, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, because the next few minutes of this are hard and I want you here for what comes after them. "There's a card case in my inside left pocket," Ellis said. "Driving license and a safety officer's certificate card with a number on it. And there's a frame on the wall at entrance C, 30 meters behind you, with the same name on it. Take the card out yourself. Don't let go of me. Just take it out." Tolley did not take the card out. Hands behind your back. And Ellis Kamara, who had been standing in that same pen at 21 years old, on the night 11 people went to hospital and 1 did not come home, looked once at the third stanchion leaning back a few degrees toward 3,000 people, and put his hands behind his back. Because Ellis was not the first person at that stadium to say those sentences. He was just the first one the promoter could not take off a shift. Femi Ajay was 20, and he had been a steward for 5 months. He was at college 2 evenings a week doing a business course he was paying for himself, and he had taken the stewarding job because it was cash on a Saturday and because he liked music, and he had discovered inside a month that he liked the job more than he liked the music. He was good. New stewards are not furniture. They are the ones who physically stand in the gap, which means the newest person on a gate looks directly at more human beings in one night than everybody above him does in a season. 11 days before all of this, at a smaller show, Femi had been on the Pen 2 gate when the counting system went to manual for the first time. He was given a clicker, and by about halfway through the evening, he had worked out something that troubled him enough to write it down. He was clicking people in, but there was a second gate feeding the same pen with a second steward and a second clicker. And nobody was adding the two numbers together anywhere. They were being written on a sheet at the end. He wrote it up on the venue's own reporting system that night, in careful plain words. Pen 2, entry counted manually on 2 gates. Totals not combined until end of shift. No live figure available to control room. Nothing happened. 6 days later, at another show, he wrote a second one, and this time he added a line at the bottom that an inspector would later read out loud twice. The side gangway in pen. 2 fills up within 30 minutes of doors, and we are not resourced to clear it. That afternoon, the promoter's venue manager, a man called Dale Kirkbride, came and found him in the steward's mess, and he was extremely pleasant, and he sat on the edge of a table so the whole thing looked like a chat. Femi, can I give you some advice? Because you're switched on, and I'd hate to watch you make an unforced error. Femi said, Okay. We have got 11,000 people to get through 6 lanes in 90 minutes, and every time we slow an entry down, we get a queue on a public road, and a queue on a public road is a different kind of dangerous. He said it kindly, and that part was true, which is what made it work. What you've done is put 2 documents into a venue system, saying, in effect, that we are running a pen without a live count. That is not an observation. That's an allegation. And casual stewards get booked show by show, and I do the booking. He let it sit. Nobody's threatening anybody, he said warmly. I'm telling you how a file reads. Femi said quietly that nobody was adding the 2 clickers together. You clicked a clicker, Kirkbride said. Let the people whose name is on the certificate worry about the certificate. That sentence became famous later, for reasons nobody in that room could have predicted. 4 days after it, the bookings came out and Femi Ajay had lost 2 shows. Not sacked, not written up. 2 shows which for a 20-year-old paying his own college fees is about £180 and the entire message. That is what he would say 11 weeks later to a safety advisory group investigator with a recorder on the table, and it is the most damning sentence in the whole file. He never actually said he'd stop booking me. He put my name in the bookings in the same conversation and let me do the rest myself. And Dale Kirkbride had gone through his own version, and it is worth 2 minutes, because Kirkbride was not a monster either. He was 44. He had a sold-out show, 6 entry lanes for 11,000 people, a counting system that failed at 6 o'clock, and a police liaison telling him that a queue backing onto a dual carriageway was not acceptable. He made a decision that people in his job make 11 times a season, keep the gates moving, and sort the numbers out at the end. What he did not do was tell the one person in the building whose signature was on the certificate. He has never denied that. What he said at the hearing was the truest and worst sentence in the transcript. I knew what he would say, so I did not ask him. That is what an institutional failure actually looks like. It is never one villain in a room. It is 4 or 5 ordinary people, each with exactly one thing to lose, arranged by a system that treats a queue on a road as a visible cost and a full gangway as an invisible one. So, when Reese Tolley told Ellis Kamara to put his hands behind his back, Femi Ajay was standing 11 meters away at the pen gate with a clicker still in his hand, watching a stranger get handcuffed for saying out loud the sentences he had been quietly punished for twice in writing. Officer! His voice came out thin, and he pushed it through anyway. Sir, he's right. Pen 2's over. The counters went manual at 6, and nobody's adding the gates and the gangways. Tolley turned his head and looked at him. Stay on your gate, mate. And Femi Ajay, 20 years old, 5 months in, booked show by a man who had already taken 2 shows off him, stayed on his gate because that is what almost all of us do. And anybody who tells you different has never had a manager sit on the edge of a table and explain their own bookings to them. He got as far as putting the clicker in his pocket. Then he stopped and did not turn back to the gate. Ellis saw all of it, over his own shoulder, with his hands going behind his back. and it told him more about his own building than 3 seasons of reports ever had. People always stop me here and ask it a little angrily, which is fair. Why did he not just say it? He did say it. In the first 11 seconds, facing a rail with his hands flat on it, "My name is Ellis Kamara. I am the safety officer for this venue." Saying it did not work, and there is a specific reason it did not work that night, and it is worth understanding because it is the whole shape of this story. He was dressed as a person in a crowd. That was a deliberate professional decision he had made years earlier and would make again, and it is correct, and it is the reason he was in a position to know anything at all. But it meant that at 21:13, on a barrier line, he had nothing on his body that said staff. And in that officer's sorting system, a man without a lanyard coming out of a crowd is a punter, and a punter who claims to run the building is a drunk. So the real question is the other one. Why did he stop arguing? The answer has 3 parts, and he gave all 3 of them to a safety advisory group hearing 9 weeks later. The first was 17 minutes. That is not very long, and everything he needed had to arrive inside it. Arguing on that barrier could have gone on for the whole 17 and ended with him released and vindicated at exactly the moment the house lights went down, which is the one moment in the evening when a decision is worth nothing. What he needed was a police supervisor and a radio channel standing on that concourse inside 5 minutes. And he knew, because he has worked 40 shows a year for 22 years alongside that force, that there is precisely one thing that summons a police sergeant to a spot in a stadium faster than anything else on earth, and it is an officer putting handcuffs on a member of the public. He has said it in exactly those words, and it made a room of event managers go very quiet. I could not get control on the radio, and I could not get through to that constable. Getting arrested was the fastest way to get a sergeant to that barrier, and I had 17 minutes. The second was the young steward on the gate. He did not yet know Femi had written it up twice. He only knew that a 20-year-old had told a stranger to go in on the left and stay by the rail, and had then put a clicker in his pocket and stopped. He knew that shape. He had been that shape at 19, telling a supervisor that the front of a pen was too tight and being sent to the far exit. And he knew that, if this ended with a title, the lesson for every casual steward in that building would be that telling the truth about a crowd is safe only when the safety officer happens to be standing next to you. That is not a lesson. That is a lottery ticket. And the third part, he has only said once, to Bernie Fitzhugh, in a car park at 2 in the morning. And Bernie has repeated it exactly twice. In 22 years at that stadium, Ellis Kamara had been asked to prove he worked there 31 times. He knew the number because he had been counting since 2006. 29 of the 31 were while he was out of high-vis, which is the honest and complicated part, and he has always said so. It is the other 2 that he thinks about. He was 41. He was standing in the middle of the answer. He was going to let it finish, fast. The cuffs went on, and they went on tight. 1 click pass necessary, out of the small performing competence of a young officer with a crowd watching. Ellis's right hand has an old boxer's fracture through the knuckles from 1999 that aches in the cold. 40 minutes later, there would be 2 red bands across his wrists, and a photograph of them, taken by a sergeant against the side of a police van, would end up in a professional standards file, and, 6 days later, on the front of a national newspaper beside a photograph of a bent barrier stanchion. "You're under arrest for a breach of the peace," Tolly said. "I understand," Ellis said, and his voice did not change at all, and that is the thing that everybody who was there remembers. It did not change. Then he said the only other thing he said, and he said it at the volume he uses to run a stadium, and it is on the body camera, and it is the reason there is an investigation rather than an apology. "Officer, I want it recorded that at 21:13, I told you Pen 2 is over its certificated capacity, the lateral gangway is blocked, and the front barrier is deforming, and that I asked you to relay that to your sergeant, and you declined. Time is 21:15. The steward on that gate is a witness. His name is Femi Adjei." Naming him out loud was deliberate. He has explained why, and the reason is the same as it always is. After that, nothing could happen to the boy quietly. They walked him along the barrier line toward the tunnel. He was not dragged. Nobody hit him. It took about a minute along the front of the pen in the light spill from the stage, past 3,000 people who were facing the other way and singing, and past perhaps 11 who were not, and who filmed. And they went past entrance C, where there is a plain black frame screwed to the wall with an extract from the venue's safety certificate in it, a list of sections, a list of capacities, and a name at the bottom. Not one person in that procession read a single word of it. Femi Ajay had not gone back to his gate. He stood at the mouth of Pen 2 with his heart going like a bird in a box, and he thought about a manager sitting on the edge of a table, explaining his bookings to him, and about 2 shows, and about a clicker in his pocket that nobody added up. And then he took his phone out and turned it sideways and pressed record. His hands shook so badly that the first 4 seconds are unusable. He got the rest. He got the cuffs. He got the card case being stood on. And then he did the thing that an inspector later called the single most valuable act by any individual in the whole matter. He did not follow them to the tunnel. He turned round, held his phone up over his head at arm's length above the pen, and filmed for 38 seconds. The density, the surge coming from the back in waves, the hands braced at chest height, and the lateral gangway packed solid from one side of the pen to the other, time stamped at 21:16. That 38 seconds is why the show was stopped, and it is why nobody was ever able to argue afterwards about what the pen had looked like. As they came past the gate, Ellis turned his head, found him, looked straight into that camera for about a second, and gave him one small nod. Femi said later that he did not know what it meant. He only knew it meant keep going. So he kept going. Hey, real quick, if you have ever stood there with your phone out, doing the math on whether the truth is worth the shifts you are booked for next month, tell me in the comments, because I would genuinely like to know how that went for you. And if you want to see what happens next, hit like and subscribe, because the next 4 minutes are the reason I wanted to tell you this one. Because at that exact moment, at the mouth of the players' tunnel, a 62-year-old man came out at a run with a clipboard in his hand. Bernie Fitzhugh had been at that stadium for 31 years and had been chief steward for 19. He was 62, wide, gray, with a voice like a gravel lorry and a knee that had been replaced twice. He had put a 19-year-old in the front pen in 2003 and told him to face the crowd, and he had stood next to that same young man in 2005 on the night 11 people went to hospital, and neither of them has ever discussed that in public, and both of them still work there. He came out of the tunnel at a run, which for Bernie Fitzhugh means a fast limp, because Control had lost the safety officer's radio at 21:13 and had been trying to raise him for 3 minutes and had finally sent somebody to physically look. He saw a man in handcuffs on the barrier line, and he stopped. It came out of a 62-year-old chief steward at a volume that a stadium tunnel amplifies, and about 200 people turned round. Get those off him! Get those off him right now! Sir, stay back. Do you know who that is? He was coming across the concrete, and he was not shouting at the constable. He had turned to shout at the 2 other officers behind him as well. That is Ellis Kamara. That is the safety officer for this ground. Son, that man's name is on the certificate that lets these gates open. It is in a frame on the wall you just walked him past. 200 people looked at the wall. The sergeant had come down the tunnel 90 seconds behind him, because a call goes out on the event channel the moment somebody is arrested in a public area, which is the entire reason Ellis had let it happen. Sergeant Nuala Byrne was 48 and had 22 years in, 11 of them working events at that stadium, and she had walked rather than run, because 22 years teaches you that arriving fast is how a supervisor makes a decision she cannot take back. She had come along the concourse past entrance C, and she had done the one thing nobody else on that barrier line had done all night. She had stopped and read the frame. Then she picked the card case up off the concrete and came over. "Tolly," she said, "with me a second." She did not make a speech. She opened the case and turned it so only he could see, and moved her thumb down it. A driving license and a personal safety officer's certificate card with a photograph, a scheme number, and a line of small print naming the venue. Then Sergeant Byrne walked 11 paces back to entrance C, put her reading glasses on, and read the framed certificate extract out loud, slowly, the section list, the capacity of pen 2, and the name at the bottom, so that her own body camera would get every syllable. Then she came back and held the card up beside the frame, so both names were in shot at once. "Same name," she said. "Take them off and give me your radio." The cuffs came off on the barrier line at 21:19. Ellis brought his hands round in front of him and turned them over. And there were 2 red bands across his wrists, one of them across an old fracture line in the back of the right hand. Bernie Fitzhugh stood in front of him and did not say anything for about 4 seconds, which, for Bernie Fitzhugh, is a speech. Ellis did not look at the sergeant. He looked at the stage where the support act was finishing its last song. "Nuala," he said. "House lights stay up. The headline does not walk on. I want that in your voice on the police channel now, and I'm going to say it on production myself in 11 seconds, but I want it on both." She said it on the police channel while he was still speaking. Then he took Bernie's radio out of his hand. "Control, this is Kamara, safety officer. I am invoking the certificate. Show is held. Nobody walks on that stage." He was already moving toward the pen gate. "House lights up now. Full. Front of house announcement in 90 seconds and I will write it. Open the vomitories both sides of pen 2 and put every steward you have got on the lateral gangway and clear it front to back. And stop the entry gates on pen 2. Physically stop them. I do not care about the queue." Then he turned round. P.C. Reese Tolley was standing very still with his mouth slightly open. He had aged about 10 years in 3 minutes, and he was already, visibly, assembling a sentence. "Sir, I want to say I had no idea who you—" "Not yet," Ellis said. He was already going through the gate into the pen, against the flow, with Bernie behind him and 40,000 people starting to notice that the lights had come up. "There are 3,000 people in there, and I have got about 10 minutes. We are going to deal with them first. Then we will deal with this." The house lights came up at 21:21 and stayed up for 26 minutes. If you have never been in a stadium when that happens, it is the most unpopular thing that can be done to 40,000 people. There was booing, there were bottles. There was, by the count of the review afterwards, a sustained noise of displeasure lasting about 4 minutes. And there is footage of a man screaming abuse 2 feet from the face of a 19-year-old steward for something that steward had no part in whatsoever. Ellis wrote the announcement himself, on a phone, standing in the mouth of pen 2, and it was 31 words long, and it did not say technical issue. It said, "We are holding the show because the front standing area is too full. We are opening the sides. Please move with the stewards. Nobody is in trouble. The show will happen." He has been asked at 3 conferences why he told 40,000 people the truth when a technical issue would have been quieter. And the answer is always the same, because a crowd that does not know why it is being moved does not move. And a crowd that is told the truth in short words moves immediately. And both of those things are in every textbook, and almost nobody does the second one. They cleared the lateral gangway in 9 minutes. They took about 800 people out of pen, 2 through the side vomitories into the general standing area behind. And the density on the barrier line fell from something in the region of 6 per square meter to something under 4. And Bernie Fitzhugh has said in public that the difference in the sound of the crowd from where he was standing was, and these are his words, like a lid coming off a pan. Nobody was hurt, not one person, not a fainting, not a fracture, not an ambulance. Ellis Kamara has said, more than once in front of rooms full of people whose job this is, that nobody being hurt is not a result. It is a delay. And it is only a result if the reason nothing happened gets written down and fixed. Then he did the thing that finished it. And he did it standing on a barrier line with red bands on his wrists, without raising his voice once. At 22:40 after the show, with the pen empty and lit and the litter 3 inches deep, He walked the sergeant, the constable, the venue manager, and 11 stewards into it. "Everybody stand where I stood at 9:10 and stop talking for a second." They stood in the empty pen for 30 seconds, which is a long time. "Right, there is nothing here now. So I am going to tell you what was here, and then I am going to show you 3 things you can all use for the rest of your lives." He walked to the third stanchion of the front barrier and put his hand on it and rocked it, and everybody could see it move. 1. That is not vertical. It is leaning back into the crowd by about 4 degrees. A barrier does that when it has been loaded past what it was built for, and the only people who can see it are the ones standing behind it, who are all looking at the stage. You will never see this from the control room, and you will never see it on a camera. He walked 20 meters across the concrete to the painted line of the lateral gangway. 2. This corridor. It is empty now, so it looks like nothing. This is the only route out of a pen sideways. If people are dying at the front, everything depends on whether this is clear, and tonight it was solid, shoulder to shoulder, for the whole width, for about 90 minutes. And there is 38 seconds of film of it, because a 20-year-old on a gate held his phone over his head. Then he stood in the middle of the pen and put his arms up, elbows out, hands braced at chest height. And 3, this. If you ever look into a pen and see people doing this, they are not enjoying themselves. They are making room for their own ribs. It is the last thing a crowd does before it stops being able to do anything at all. And once you have seen it once, you will never mistake it for anything else again. Nobody said anything at all. The litter crunched. Then he turned to Dale Kirkbride, the venue manager, and did not raise his voice. "You switched 2 gates to manual at 6 o'clock because the counters faulted and a queue was building on a public road. That was a defensible decision, and I would probably have made it. What you then did is the part I cannot get past. You did not tell me. And you did not tell me, by your own account at 4 o'clock this afternoon, to 2 people in your office, because you knew what I would say." Kirkbride did not deny it, then or later. "Then I want you to understand what that means, because it is not about me. There is one person in this building whose signature is on the certificate, and the entire system is built around the idea that person gets told. When you decide not to tell them, because you already know their answer, you have not avoided a delay. You have removed the only mechanism the law provides." Then he turned to the constable. And this is the part that got quoted in a police training document 11 months later. "And you did not need to know what a certificated capacity is. You did not need to believe one word I said. You needed to press a button on your radio and say 5 words to your sergeant, and if I was a drunk idiot, you would have lost 11 seconds and looked slightly silly to one person. That is the whole cost. That is the entire cost of the alternative." Tolley said quietly that he was sorry. "I know," said Ellis, "and I'm going to be honest with you in front of these people, because I think you have got about 30 years of this job left, and somebody should. It is not the handcuffs. It is the 5 words you said at the barrier. You will think about the handcuffs, and everybody will talk about the handcuffs. And the handcuffs were a mistake that a lot of officers would have made. The 5 words were you." And then he turned away from him. And that was the last thing he said to him. And it was not about him at all. Femi Ajay came across the litter with his phone still in his hand and the face of a young man who expects never to be booked again. "You wrote it up," Ellis said. "Twice. 11 days ago and 5 days ago. 2 gates, 2 clickers, no live figure. And then you wrote that the gangway fills within half an hour of doors and that you are not resourced to clear it, which is the actual finding of this entire investigation. And you wrote it before any of it happened. Nobody read them, mate. Sorry, sir." "Mate is fine." Ellis put out his hand and the boy shook it. "They are going to be read out loud by an inspector, and then by the local authority, and then by me at a licensing meeting with your name on them. And that 38 seconds you filmed over your head is the most useful piece of evidence anybody produced tonight, including me." Then he looked at the empty pen and at the litter and at 11 exhausted stewards. "Right," he said. "Nobody touches that barrier. I want it inspected in place in the morning. Bernie, get the counting logs and both clickers off those gates and put them in a bag tonight and sign the bag. And somebody go and find the 11 stewards who got screamed at when the lights came up, because they took that for us, and nobody has said anything to them yet. The 2 clickers, added together for the first time at 1 o'clock in the morning, on a table in a steward's room, came to 2,881. Pen 2 is certificated at 2,200. That is 1.31. The local authorities' report puts it more carefully than that, because there is an argument about people who left and came back, and the final agreed figure is between 2,700 and 2,900, which changes nothing at all about the point. The front barrier was inspected in place at 8 the next morning. The third stanchion had a permanent deformation of about 4 degrees and a hairline in the weld at the base, and it was replaced along with the 2 either side of it before that stadium opened again. The Safety Advisory Group's report ran to 51 pages. Its central finding is one sentence on page 4. The venue operated a standing area without a live occupancy figure for a period of approximately 3 hours, and the officer legally responsible for the certificate was not informed that this was the case. 2 things came out of it. The first is a rule that now applies at every venue in that region with a standing area. If the electronic counting system on any entrance fails, that section closes at 80% of certificated capacity, automatically, with no discretion for anybody, and manual counting alone is no longer an acceptable basis for filling a pen. It is 1 paragraph. 4 other councils adopted it within a year. Ellis had proposed exactly that rule in writing in 2022, and it had been described as commercially difficult. The second is that the promoter lost that venue, not because of the crowd in the end, but because of one sentence in an interview transcript. I knew what he would say, so I did not ask him. Dale Kirkbride is not working in live events. He gave evidence, all of it, without a lawyer trying to soften it, and Ellis said so at the hearing, unprompted, when he could have said nothing. P.C. Reese-Tolley was placed on restricted duties pending a professional standards investigation. The body camera footage, the stadium cameras, Femi's video, and 2 photographs of a safety officer's cuffed wrists all went into the file. 5 words at 2114 were dealt with separately, and that outcome is not public. Ellis wrote to that force, and his letter did not ask for anybody to be dismissed. It asked one question: what is the written procedure for an officer at a licensed event when a member of the public identifies themselves as the venue's safety officer and reports a capacity breach, and why did that procedure not operate? There was no answer because there was no procedure. There is one now. It is a laminated card in every event briefing pack in that force area. It is 4 lines long, and the second line is, if a person claims to be the venue safety officer, relay it. It costs 11 seconds. Femi Ajay is not a casual steward. He is a full-time crowd safety supervisor at that stadium. The venue paid for his qualification. And he works to Bernie Fitzhugh, who does not hand out compliments and who has been overheard describing him as one to watch. The first thing he does on any pen gate, in front of anybody, is turn his back on the stage and look at the crowd, which is the whole job and which about 1 person in 6 ever really learns. His 2 reports printed out are pinned above the desk in the steward's room. Somebody put them there as a joke. Nobody has taken them down. And there was one more thing, and Ellis did it himself in the spring. A month before all of this, P.C. Tolley had moved an elderly black woman off the fan zone as a suspected tout. Her name was Winnie Osei. She was 66, and she had been selling handmade badges outside that ground for a church roof fund since 1984, and she had a letter from the church in her bag that nobody asked to see. She had not come back. Ellis found her through the church, sat in her kitchen for 2 hours, and then did the only thing a safety officer can actually do, which is not a favor, but a change. There is now a permitted community stall inside the fan zone, with a table and a permit and a named contact, and the first permit on the list is hers. So here's the honest part, and it is uncomfortable, and I am not going to dress it up. Ellis Kamara was saved by 4 coincidences. He happened to be the safety officer. He happened to be carrying his certificate card. He happened to have a 20-year-old steward brave enough to press record and clever enough to film the pen instead of the arrest. And a 62-year-old chief steward happened to come out of a tunnel looking for a radio that had gone quiet in the 1 minute of the one night it mattered. And 40,000 people were saved by all 4 of those, and by a man deciding that the fastest way to get a police sergeant to a barrier was to let himself be arrested at it. Take away any one of them, and there is no video, no held show, no rule change. There is a man in the back of a van, a headline act walking on, at 9:30 to a pen at 1.31, with a bent barrier and no gangway, and then either nothing happens, which is what usually happens, or something does. And there is an inquiry that lasts 4 years. Most people who get looked at the way Ellis got looked at that night do not have their name on a frame at entrance C. Nobody comes out of a tunnel shouting it. They go in the van, and the show goes on. And nothing about it is ever written down anywhere at all. And the 2 failures on that barrier line were the same failure. Nobody looked. A venue manager did not tell the one person the law names because he already knew the answer. An officer did not press a radio button that cost 11 seconds. A capacity notice at entrance C had a poster taped over the numbers and had been like that for a fortnight, and nobody had taken it down because it had become part of the wall. Bernie Fitzhugh told me at 19 that a crowd tells you with its body about 10 minutes before it tells you with a scream, and that the warning is silent and written in shoulders, and that almost nobody has ever been taught to read it. I have had 22 years to think about that, and here is where I have got to. It is true of people one at a time as well. Everybody in that pen was telling somebody something with their hands at chest height. A 20-year-old on a gate had been telling the building for 11 days in writing. I was telling a police officer with my hands flat on a rail. Every one of those was a silent warning from somebody who had been sorted into a category, and the whole system we had built was superb at counting people and completely unable to hear any of them. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who saw it first and got told to stay on your gate? Have you ever been Femi, standing at a barrier with your phone, doing the math on the shifts you are booked for next month? And be honest with yourself for a second, because I am being honest with myself. Have you ever had somebody's hands flat on a rail in front of you, telling you something, and heard only what category they were? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and this one I really do want to hear. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this is what I do here every week. Ordinary people, written off in a few seconds. And what happens when somebody finally looks. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.